Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Business Breakthrough. I'm going to hand over to Vicky Henderson here, who's going to interview our guest this morning. Vicky, over to you.
Thank you very much. So this morning's guest is the fabulous Kay Hamblin. Kay has an interesting background, having started out in veterinary science. So Kay, obviously you've moved from there into what you're doing at the moment, and today you're going to share with us a little bit about your knowledge from the legal and HR aspects surrounding equality, diversity and inclusion. So first up is, as a business owner and employer, Kay, why should I care about equality, diversity and inclusion?
I think that I've got sort of like a three-pronged answer to that, I think. And first off, I think it's just that it's the right thing to do. I don't think anybody here would sort of suggest somebody should be excluded or treated differently just because of something about them, whether that's their gender or their age or their sexuality or any other sort of characteristic. So there's a sort of moral case for it. There's also really quite a strong business case. There's been a lot of research that's shown that businesses that are more diverse, certainly at the board level, perform better financially. And a lot of the theory about that is that it is that diversity of thought and opinion in the boardroom. So rather than it being a sort of a groupthink mentality of everybody having these kind of fixed ways of thinking, that it increases diversity of thought. And also that they reflect better the communities that they're serving. And it's something that a lot of people want to work with people that are like them. So if you're more diverse, then you're serving a wider community. And also, I think in the current situation, we're all hearing about the Great Resignation and, struggling to get good people and retain good people. Why would you potentially exclude whole sectors of the population who could be really valuable employees? There's also then the kind of a legal case. So under the Equality Act 2010, there is this protection from discrimination for specific protected characteristics. And I think that it's important to remember that starts even before you employ somebody. So, the way that you recruit, the way that you advertise, and the way that you behave generally can all lay you open to claims of discrimination. And aside from there being unlimited awards in discrimination cases, you've got to think about the damage to your reputation, potentially. It's not something that anybody wants splashed around the news that you've been involved in discriminating or treating people badly, I don't think. You're muted, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, Kay. So what do you think employers are worried about when it comes to diversity and discrimination?
I think a lot of people are very worried about getting it wrong. A lot of employers do care about this stuff and they want to get it right, but sometimes they feel a little bit at sea and they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing. I think, they worry about the damage financially and to their reputation. And so it becomes an important part of their business to think about these issues. I do think there are also concerns about the cost to them of being more inclusive. And I think this is quite it's a difficult area to talk about because obviously we're all about wanting to be more inclusive. But, and I think it sounds a bit harsh to talk about it, but if you're a small employer and you employ somebody who perhaps has a long-term health condition or caring responsibilities, you might have concerns that they're going to be absent more and about the strain and pressure that's going to put on other members of the team. And I think they are genuine concerns. It doesn't sound very nice. And if you're a very large company, you can probably absorb those costs and those disruptions more easily. But if you're a small business, it can make a huge impact on you. When under the Disability Discrimination Act, which has been replaced by the Equality Act, there were exemptions for smaller employees, but that's all changed now. Personally, I kind of think it would be a positive move if there was more support for small employers from the government in helping people with, say, disabilities into the workplace and supporting them there. Because employers want to do the right thing, but I think sometimes they're just a bit scared about the potential consequences to their business.
I think you're right there. It's a real it's a balancing act between wanting to do the right thing and maybe even finding the right person, but then obviously there's, you know, can you afford to support it and sustain it? So it's, as you say, a difficult conversation to have, but one that comes up.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, there are obviously an awful lot of people with disabilities who are incredibly talented and would bring a lot to your workplace. And, you know, when we heard from people like Tony Solomon a couple of months ago, you know, who's helping some of these people into work, and they're a huge asset. But I think there is that kind of fear factor. And if there was more support from government agencies, then maybe that would be a good step to help people sort of make that leap of faith almost.
So are there any issues which are particularly causing concern at the moment, or pitfalls that employers need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, I sort of say, I think one of the things that people sometimes forget is that protection from discrimination does begin before you actually become employed. So employers might think that things like having something in their contract about probationary periods means that they can dismiss somebody and not worry about this stuff, but that's just not the case. So you've got that protection from day one. There isn't this kind of grace period that you've got for unfair dismissal claims. If you treat somebody less favourably because of a protected characteristic, or if they reasonably believe that you have, then, you know, they can bring a case against you. And if it is a reasonable case, you can be in a position where there's something called the reverse of the burden of proof. So rather than as an employer, you're innocent till proven guilty, it's the other way around. You've got to show that you didn't discriminate. So you've got to have a good paper trail and be able to evidence that the decisions you made were fair and were for fair reasons. So that can be quite challenging. I think aside from that, the things that are coming up an awful lot at the moment are things like mental health problems and neurodivergent conditions. So sometimes these may not be obvious. Sometimes the person who is suffering from this or experiencing this doesn't have a diagnosis or isn't really aware of the condition. I was on a seminar recently and they were suggesting that in 2021, stress, anxiety and depression accounted for 50% of sickness absence in the UK and cost the UK economy, I think 42 billion was the figure that was quoted, which seems extraordinary, but that was the figure that was suggested. They also suggested that something like 17% of the population have some form of neurodivergence, so autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. There's a whole range of neurodivergent conditions, but only 2% have actually got a diagnosis. So you've got this double problem of there are a lot of people who have neurodivergent conditions, mental health problems, but very often they're not disclosed to the employer for many reasons. There's obviously still some stigma attached in some people's minds to some of these conditions, and also because they may not even have a diagnosis. And I think that can be challenging. Another one that's coming up a lot at the moment is flexible working requests and the potential for indirect discrimination there. So particularly women returning from maternity leave who want to work flexibly for childcare reasons. There have been a couple of cases in the last 12 months or so. I mean, one was an award of 40,000 and one was 185,000 to women who were returning, whose employers just hadn't considered their request at all. So, I mean, they've been dealt with very, very badly. There had been talk about the employment bill bringing forward a right to request flexible working from day one, but that seems to have been quietly shelved in the Queen's speech, so we're not quite sure if or when that's all going to come through. And another one that's rising on the agenda, I think, is issues around the menopause, because obviously you've potentially got both sex discrimination and age discrimination involved in that, and that's something that's growing and it's being recognised. And again, a lot of employers are starting to take things seriously, but there's still a lot of work to be done, I think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, particularly this one that you've been talking about. Having been on the end of it myself, you know, suffered long-term mental health problems throughout my life. I never disclosed it to an employer because I was like, well, I'm not going to get the job if I actually come up front with this, and that makes it difficult for the employers. But also for the person, because they're kind of coming into the business and trying to keep the whole things under wraps. So yeah, the challenges from both sides, I think, aren't there?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, actually raising awareness, creating open, supportive workplaces where it's okay to talk about this stuff. And some of that needs to come from the top down, because it's not just the people doing the day-to-day jobs on the ground who have these challenges. It's people who are managing them as well. So if we have a more open and honest and kind of supportive environment, it's easier for everybody to have these conversations. And I think things like first aid for mental health training is becoming more widespread and more commonplace. But again, perhaps rather than it just being two people from one department who go on training like that, it should be broader and more managers should be involved in that sort of thing. And just creating, a more open, honest culture where people feel able to disclose this stuff. And then you put in place the support that they need. Because if you don't know, it's difficult.
Yeah.
There are also an increasing number of cases, I think, where employees genuinely didn't know that somebody had a mental health condition or were, say, on the autism spectrum, and they've been treated in a particular way, and then they're facing a tribunal claim, and then there's this whole kind of, well, say you didn't know, should you have known, could you reasonably have known? So it's quite a challenging area for employers, I think, as well as for employees. I get it from both sides.
It's certainly, so having experienced it from both sides, it's definitely challenging, and getting it right is a delicate balance. And when you do get it right, it's brilliant, but it's quite easy to put your foot in the wrong place.
They're difficult conversations to have, aren't they? They're very difficult conversations.
They are. I mean, I'm mental health first aid trained, which makes it a lot easier. So, and as you say, I think that'd be great for more people to have. So you mentioned earlier about support for employers. Is there any help available out there?
Well, sort of. So the government does have something called Access to Work. It's not directly support for employers. It is actually designed is something that employees apply for. It's not really intended to fund reasonable adjustments, which are the adjustments that an employer has to make by law to accommodate somebody with a disability. But the employee can get grants for things like adapting equipment, transport to work if they can't take public transport, a sign language interpreter, job coaches, and mental health support. So there is a range of stuff out there, and as an employer, you'd need to sort of have a conversation with the employee, because it's the employee who applies for that. There is a guide for employers to it. I've got a couple of links which I'll put in the chat if anybody's interested in that. So that's there. I have had a few employers that I've worked with who have managed to get some help from that. So with maybe adapted office furniture and things like that for people who need something special. There are obviously the various associations for specific conditions. So the Dyslexia Association, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, various other organisations that provide specific support and stuff like autism assessments for people on the autism spectrum, or you think might be on the autism spectrum. But although they provide information, a lot of it obviously comes down to who's going to pay for some of this stuff. But as an employer, if you can help that, again, if you're waiting for an autism assessment on the NHS, it could take a couple of years, whereas if you can pay for that, that's going to be something that's going to be much, much quicker. There's no longer any help at all with SSP for employers. There was the brief spell when they could reclaim SSP for COVID, but that's gone. Some employers actually aren't aware that you can reclaim maternity pay. So statutory maternity pay, almost all of that gets reclaimed. So there's a bit out there, but not a huge amount of practical support, I don't think, from the powers that be.
Well, hopefully one day that will all change. But for the moment, we have to go with what we want. I think there's a bit of interest in the chat, Kay, around the links that you offered. So if you had just one last piece of advice for everybody, what would it be?
I think if you think you might be heading into one of these situations where there may be an issue around discrimination, and get some help and get it sooner rather than later. I mean, there's a lot of resources available free of charge from ACAS. They've got a lot of guidance, and you can even have phone support. They can't offer kind of specific legal advice on the situation, but they can give a lot of general advice. I mean, it breaks my heart sometimes. We get a call that somebody says, I've just done this, is that okay? And it's like, no, it's really not okay. But now, you've made the situation 10 times worse, and we've got to go back 6 steps and try and dig you out of the hole that you put yourself in. So it's definitely one of those situations where prevention is better than cure. So if you're in any doubt, then, get some advice and get it sooner rather than later, I think I'd always say.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, Kay. And I'm quite sure if anybody wants to get in touch with you, that they will be able to do so.
Yeah, my details in the chat, and I'll pop those links in now, actually. And then,
Brilliant.
look, thanks, Vicky.
Thank you very much. So, do we move straight on to you, Pete?
Let's move straight on, and let's have let's go to the next half. Normally these two halves of what we do would be directly related, and we're decoupling them a little bit this morning because we wanted to have a quick look at where Business Breakthrough's at. So I've sent a little bit of a briefing over to Vicky, and Vicky's going to ask me a few questions, and we're going to see where it all goes from here. Over to you, Vicky, to start.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Pete. This feels a little bit strange, having done this the other way around several times before. So, Pete, how did Business Breakthrough come about in the first place, and what's its objectives?
Yes, okay. So Business Breakthrough, if I cast right back to 2017 and 2018, and we were doing what was then the Gloucestershire Business Show. We just started the South Gloucestershire Business Show. We realised that what we were doing as a festival of business and innovation was about bringing communities together and about creating a business network. And it was right at the end of the show in 2017, I think, that we started a conversation with a few partners sat around at Cheltenham Racecourse, which is where we held it then, about wouldn't it be good to have a regular get-together, actually, that is not just happening on an annual basis. So that conversation rolled around, as these things do, for about a month or 2 or 3 or 4, and a few of our partners got involved, notably Jill, who's on the screen, was there in the very beginning of the discussions, and a few others. And we thought, yes, actually, let's try and build a bit of creativity. The Gloucestershire Business Show itself is not a networking item. It's a festival of business and innovation. And also, there's only so much that I can cover that we can cover, on our own. So one of the things we were quite clear about at the beginning was that this needs to be a real partnership affair, and owned not by one person or organisation. So a couple of the organisations came on board a little bit later. Once we were getting going, Louise joined us. And we thought, well, we'll hold it once a month. We were partnering at that time with Micro Hotel in Gloucester, so they said, well, let's host it here, and off we went. And we thought, while the objectives of these things are about creating business sales, actually, we'll talk a little bit later on about how that works. But the starting point is to get to know people and to build relationships. So we started meeting at the Bowden Hall Hotel and said, look, it's just a matter of coming together and meeting and saying hello. So that's what we were doing, with an objective of getting to know people and hoping that allows us to support building business, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, I remember very well the meetings at Bowden Hall, because I used to come along to them regularly. Lovely in-face meetings, great breakfast, great people. And then COVID happened. Big C word. So what kind of happened next, Pete?
Well, it's where we sit now from a point where I think to say COVID is behind us would be a bit strong, but to say certainly there is a semblance of normality of life coming back together now. So as we sit here and we look backwards, and we think about that period of time, which is the first quarter really of 2020, it was a very odd and interesting time. I was on holiday at my in-laws in America in February that year, and we remember, you know, the stories started appearing out of China and what have you in January, and then February it was notable that, you know, face masks around and there was a bit of nervousness going on, and then we moved into March, and of course that's when it really hit, and people, you know, you could see the thing coming down the line. But I think, as is the way with so many things, you just about get your head around a timescale of what might happen, and it usually then halves. And I have a son who at the time was at Sandhurst and you know, they suddenly decided they were going to pull Sandhurst and get people away from home, and that was literally moments before we all had the news, and we went to pick him up, came home from Sandhurst, and the next day, I think it was, Boris Johnson said, okay, it's all over. You know, this was all about the Tuesday or Wednesday, and come the end of the week, we were all on lockdown and everything was closing down fast. So we'd seen that developing, and we'd been saying, as we were planning these things, gosh, well, you know, what's going to happen? We'd all begun using Zoom. I think I recall that Zoom was a thing, that I was vaguely aware of the word, in that first quarter, a little bit earlier, because it was a new product that was out anyway. But suddenly everybody, you know, was beginning to use Zoom, and you sort of go, okay, well, you know, we're going to meet anyway. We've got this thing going on, so why don't we do it on Zoom? You know, so that was a brand new, exciting moment in time, and we landed on Zoom in April, I think it was, possibly even March with respect to be briefly honest, I can't remember. And off we went, and we started meeting there, and we have a sister network which was very much focused on Cheltenham, called, as I said, South Cheltenham Business Network, that also came to a grinding halt. So we started planning the two of them together. They both happened in the third week, but South Cheltenham in the Wednesday and this on the Friday. And we launched on Zoom, and people seem to like it. Obviously, the element of, we're not doing anything else, we want to keep in touch, so let's keep going, but let's do it on Zoom, and that's how it started going forward from there.
Well, I was a Zoomer for 3 years before the pandemic came along, and yeah, it's been a great joy to me for everyone to now be able to use it properly, because I used to get a lot of people who went to me, I can't do Zoom. I'm really terrified of being on camera, so it's a joy to see everybody here today. So the 3-week lockdown that Boris announced became 6 months, and then 2 years later, here we are, several lockdowns, and a bit of liberation since then. How's the Business Breakthrough evolved during that time, Pete?
Yeah, so Business Breakthrough, and I think rather than Business Breakthrough specifically, I think the thing that I look at is networking in general. And there's a friend of mine who reasonably early in the lockdown pointed me in the direction of a piece of work that had come out of the University of California, which was really interesting and enlightening. I've got dogs beginning to play behind me here, so apologies if you get noises off. I'll try and manage the situation. And that is that when we're in a room together having breakfast or having lunch or just generally a glass of wine or whatever it is we're doing, when you look at a piece of communication, 52% of that is the body language. And actually, you know, well, we all know what we mean by body language, but everything about that. About 38% of it then is tonality. You know, am I being cross with you? Am I being friendly towards you? Am I smiling? Am I being harsh? And then about 10% of it is the actual language you're using, the actual words you're using, which is why so often we walk out of a situation with a live conversation, say, did you not hear what I'm saying? Or I can't believe you just said, you know, because actually the actual words, the actual language is quite often, well, it is always when we're live together, the thing that people don't pick up on, it's body language and tonality. And I realise, talking to Vicky, who's an expert in this space in her own right, I'm only just, you know, but there you go. But that was really interesting, and it wasn't a surprise to me, but it's so often the way when you quantify something into words, it suddenly goes, oh yeah, okay, I get that, yeah, I understand that. If you go on screen, that is 100% flipped, almost exactly the same relationships, in that the major part of what you're getting when we have this conversation is the words. It's what you're listening to. If you're on screen, maybe you're distracted, maybe something else is going on around you, but you are listening, so you're picking up the actual language. The tonality with compression and how things work over the internet is reduced on what it would be if you're in the room. And of course, body language, you're not getting more or less any of, because you're not there with them in front of you. So actually, your brain is working in a very different way to the way it works when you're having a conversation in the room, which also explains why, you know, people come away from a Zoom thing feeling very tired and emotionally tired, because actually your brain has been doing an awful lot of work in working out how to translate the language that it's used to seeing in the room and how it's picking it up here and then making something out of it. There's some really interesting dialogue that flows through from that, which we'll only find out in years to come, is will this whole thing have trained our brains to think in different ways, to operate in different ways? Will we stop feeling so Zoom tired because our brain will have learned to deal with that? And what will that do in turn when we're back and talking more sensibly in the room? And these are questions which academics are looking at. But that does change our thinking about networking. The other thing, which isn't human behaviorally related, of course, is that when we're meeting here, we're coming from all over the place. Christina is sitting in Malawi, and had he been with us, Tom would have been in the States. We could not have done that for this moment in time in room to room. It just wouldn't have worked for all the obvious reasons, and many of you less dramatically are in Bristol and Gloucestershire and what have you. So what it has done is it's enabled us to spread networks in a more efficient way, but in the same way that email has its relationship to spoken word or written word, efficiency has its good and its bad moments. Now, so therefore, it's changed how we think about networking and actually how we all respond and relate to the networking, and what we think about it as an efficiency going forward. Now, just pausing for a second, I think I've lost Vicky off my screen.
I know, I'm still here.
You're still there, sorry. It all dropped round and I thought, oh my word, have you dropped out? No, you're there, sorry. Vicky, you are there, lovely. So so when you come back to that question of how networking has evolved, I think we're in an ongoing situation with that. And I think there's a lot of people I hear, some people love Zoom networking, some people hate it, some people are desperate to get back to the room, some people are nervous to get back into the room. My own view, jury slightly out, as ever it probably will be for a long time, but I think they're two very, very different things, and understanding how we use each in our own world is very, very important, if that makes sense.
No, I think you're right. The whole communication thing, the Zoom fatigue, I mean, even though I used to be on Zoom for quite a lot before lockdown started, I suddenly ended up 8 hours a day on Zoom, and wow, that was enough to blow the brain out. But yes, very interesting from a communication point of view. So thinking about business breakthrough, the South Cheltenham networking, obviously the team has evolved over the years. Kind of bring us up to date to where we are with that now.
Yeah, okay. So we as I said to you before, the two sort of very much came into line over this 2 years, and Jill and Louise and I primarily were looking at business breakthrough, and then there's a chap called Neil Morgan and a chap called David Henson. David joined us later on in the day, who were looking at South Cheltenham, and slightly wonderfully, the two constituencies have overlap. There are some, probably some here on the screen. In fact, I think who have been doing a little bit of both. But for the large part, we've got two different audiences, but we've been programming them together so that we effectively were duplicating one on the other with a few nuance changes. And I think part of it was sometimes people could do a Wednesday morning easily and other people could do a Friday morning easily. And so it worked very well. And so we come together and we plan them both. Vicky's just very kindly joined the team with Ascend Performance Coaching to help us look at the programming now that we think about looking to the future. As David Henson joined us from the South Cheltenham side of things, because he's very embedded in that South Cheltenham space. So over the 2 years that we have led up to this point, they have evolved in the sense that we've all done a lot of thinking and understanding about how these partnership networks work. We've always been open to people coming and joining us and getting involved in helping run them, and a little bit of a moment of putting the flag here and say, if anybody wants to actually get under the skin of helping us put this thing together, we'd love to hear from you, because these are partnerships, and a spread workload is an easier workload, and there's lots of things that we all need to do. Vicky is coming on board to work with me and helpfully plan the programming going forward. We use a lot of programming from the shows, which I'll relate to a little bit later on. But sometimes especially when we're busy, we turn to these things a little bit too last minute. I think we'd all admit that and go, oh my word, there's and we're going to put it together. And by working with Vicky, I think we're going to be able to have a little bit more long-term view about what we're tackling and what we're doing and who we're talking to and how we're talking to them and all this kind of game. Where does it go from here? So that's something we begin to look at the tail end of last year, and we've been working through. The two network groups are still quite closely aligned in the sense that a lot of people involved in both. But in that intervening 2 years, Jill moved herself from Gloucestershire down to Somerset, and so where she used to pitch up every month with us at South Cheltenham, that's a bit kind of, oh my word. But as you'll all experience later, she brings a really valuable business challenge to us. And so David has picked up that actually live on the ground in South Cheltenham. How do we go forward? Well, I think as the two networks separate out again and South Cheltenham becomes very much there on the ground, bacon butties saying hello and here's a business network in South Cheltenham, that'll take a line in its own right. Business breakthrough, we're going to, I think, be looking here. It will remain online, and we're going to be looking at the topics that people want to look at. We want to get people involved. We want to get partners involved and grow it that way. So I think it's a bit of a plan that is in the evolving process, but it's going to be interesting to see over the next 2 years. But the two teams will definitely work closely together. And if anybody, as I say, wants to come and get involved, then feel free to jump on board.
There's an offer. Just
Challenge, not an offer.
Just beware if you say yes. We all
Yes.
got peated at one. We all got peated at one point or another. Pete, if you had to identify a couple of values that kind of sum up the network, what would that be? So,
I think relational networking is an easy roll off the tongue thing, but networks. Every network has its characteristics and its difference. But if I were to get two broad categories going, you get the networks which are really, really about sales, and organizations like BNI and 4N are about delivering measurable, metric-driven sales results into your business. And I have every respect and a lot of time for those organizations, but they are very clearly defined in what they are. They will hold you to account and they will make sure that that happens. And BNI is a very, very effective way. And I know plenty of people who do no marketing other than they are part of a BNI. There's a premium to be paid for it, then results come, and it's a driven agenda. And if that works well for your business, then I applaud it. But it is very different to things like, if you have the other extreme end of the scale, you have things like chambers of commerce and what have you, where it's about community, it's about taking an external view on what's going on in the space. So what we do, what I'm very involved in is relational networking. There is some science behind it. It's not just a chat space. Basically, there's, again, clear evidence, but we see it all the time. People do business with people, that's an easy, well-worn phrase. If you have a relationship with somebody, then there is a far higher chance that you will see repeat business from that person, and there's a higher chance that there will be a better margin in the business you do. You have to be careful with that. You can't take things for granted, but there is definitely a premium in margin to be had from saying, look, I know you, I trust you, I know you're going to deliver, and it's got to happen. Many of you know I come from decades working in the music and festivals and entertainments world, and we roll a show out or we roll a festival out. If we're working with a supplier, we have to know that that supplier is going to turn up when they said they would and do the thing they did, because it all goes wrong very fast if things start going wrong. So we would really get to know people that we were working with. If I have a better longevity and a better premium, then I spend less time chasing new sales all the time, and actually my efficiency and my productivity of our work team goes up because they're doing the profitable stuff for me rather than chasing around sales and driving down margins. Okay, so there are very different ways of dealing with that, but that's the basis behind relational business networking. There's also a mental health and a people in business type side of things. You know, we deal with a lot of people, or deal with, that's the wrong phrase, but we know and we talk to a lot of people who work from home, who, you know, and if you do a very intense IT job, then working from home can be very isolating indeed. I mean, I work from home, but my very job is to get out and meet people, so I'm kind of in a better place. But so there's a mental health side to this as well, which isn't about driving sales. It's about getting to know people and building a community. So relational business network would probably be one of the outcomes I would be talking about. And then I'd say quality key business relationships, leading to stronger lines of business in profitability and productivity. And then I think the final one I would flag here is a quick thing, is just building a business community, because that is so important, especially in this day and age, digital communications, all the isolationist things that we know about. So not everybody, most of us on this call, know how to communicate with people. That's why you do networking, because it's what you do. There are a lot of people who struggle with that. So actually, if we can inclusively build them in, then we build a business community, and hopefully it all moves forward.
Brilliant. I mean, I think from talking to people in all of my networks, because I do everything from BNI through to you know, the Chamber of Commerce and this, support has been a word that comes up time and time again, particularly in the last 2 years. You know, when we couldn't get out and see other people, and suddenly a screen full of faces was just fantastic. Pete, one last question for you. I'm aware of time now. How do you fit the networking events, and how do they kind of connect up with the business shows?
Yeah, so that's a little. There's a lot of stuff that we do that we describe anecdotally and with a grin on our faces, a little bit below the radar. You know, people look at the shows and they think about the sort of the business exhibition and and they describe us as an expo. Sometimes we're a festival in the format. We have a lot of content in those 2 days, and I'm sure Jill's put the link to our content in the chat somewhere. And actually, we find these meetings really helpful on a couple of counts. First of all, at a simple get people involved, meet people, whether that's an exhibitor or a contributor. It's lovely to meet you all, meet new people. And I know, you know, John Fisher, I can see, you know, we've been talking about getting involved in the cyber side of what we do, and I haven't forgotten you, John. Honestly, we're just trying to get it all sorted. But these are ways of us talking to people and meeting people and finding out what people are involved, because we can draw them into the content of the show, which isn't the commercial side. It's about how that festival thread works, how we test space out. But also, we come on these meetings on a regular basis, and Kay leads a load of stuff at the show, and it's great to hear Kay talking to you this morning, because we all use this to rehearse the thread, to understand what's on people's minds, and to get thinking going. And that all feeds when you're sat in a panel or managing a panel or whatever at the show, having some feel for what the vibe is, what's being said and what's needed is really important. So these are great rehearsal spaces and rehearsal times, if you like, and ways of thinking things through with people, that all feeds into our program for every show we do.
No, absolutely. Having been part of the live shows and then involved in the very first Business Insights, when we streamed live from a theatre under socially distanced conditions, I think what I love about the way the business shows have developed in the last few years is the fact that actually we've now got that international element, and that, you know, the people in the room, if you've not been to one of the shows, highly recommend coming to it. But, you know, for Nick and Christina, who are coming in from China and Malawi, we've got that international option to get everybody involved as well now. Pete, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us this morning, and thank you to both Pete and Kay. I think everybody's found that really useful and interesting, and I'm going to hand over back to Jill again.
Thank you.